And it has started. So I do want to let you know, yes, because you joined this virtual session, thank you very much. You do not have to post anything around this virtual session on Blackboard. What I'm going to do, hopefully by tomorrow morning or later tonight after this session, I'm going to take the recording from yesterday and the recording from today, and I'm going to post them on Blackboard. I cannot talk. Blackboard for the other, say, 12 or 11 other people, and they are going to be, if there is the alternative assignment that they can look at either or both of these, and they literally have to try to type in something to join in the conversation. And so that's the idea. I hope the next two opportunities we have in week 4 and week 6, then more people will join. That way we get really good stuff when we can talk to each other, and that's just the nature of literature. It's just, you've all said some really insightful things so far on Blackboard, but it's really one way. You post and you go on about your life, and then if I force you to come back and look at it, you might. But this kind of discussion, just the things that Savannah was saying already, we can't really get that in an asynchronous format. And so that's why I introduced this virtual opportunity. Yeah, so hopefully it works. And so one of the things you were saying, Savannah, is I need to tell the truth. I got super lucky finding Lovecraft and Lavelle and matching them together. I wish I can say like, oh, I had this master plan. I did not. I was like, it would be cool if I can find something. We're looking at 3 subgenres. So this is my brief introduction, and I'm already a bit over time. But I was thinking we're looking at 3 subgenres of popular lit: horror and dark fantasy. And then we have detective, crime, and mystery. And then we have speculative fiction and time travel. And I thought, you know, normally we would read maybe 6 different texts, and we're still going to read 6 texts. But like, it would be great if I can match something up in one of these categories. And I don't even recall how I stumbled across. I know I was going to do Lovecraft. I don't know how I found the other guy, but I found him, and I'm like, this is great because they're not very long. So we're starting the semester off, and this is a condensed semester. So I'm glad, Precious, you love to read, because we're reading, you know, in 7 weeks what we would normally do in 14 weeks. So if you feel it creeping up on you like a horror movie the time, that's because it is creeping up on you. We have a lot to do in a little bit of time. So matching these 2 together, and they're the only 2 texts that I had not ever read before this course. So we're coming to it on equal ground, so to speak. I had not read either one of these. And the other 2 I know like in my sleep. So if I don't seem to be telling you everything I possibly can about these 2, is because I kind of read them like a couple of weeks ago also. But yeah, the perspective is awesome. And I wonder, did either any of you had a chance to listen to Lavelle's, what is it, the interview? It wasn't required, but it's part of the material.
I got a chance to read the interview, and it was very interesting. I found it very interesting.
Yes, I thought that was great material to have. And some things you were saying, Savannah, if you haven't had a chance to look at, listen to, or read it, because you can listen to it too. Some of the things you're saying, giving that perspective about the same story, Laval actually like explains like why some of the ideas that how he came to even write that. And I also think both of these stories are really good to get at some of the student learning outcomes we have. Like, how does this literature help us think about social issues in the world and the community? And they have a lot of social content. If you remember some of just how Lavelle describes people in his text, and remembering that I'm sorry, not Lavelle, Lovecraft. Lovecraft was written in 1924. And then we get this contemporary take on it this perspective. So I'm gonna stop droning on. I'm droning on more today than I did yesterday. And I'm gonna go back to the agenda. So what we did yesterday is I broke people into groups, and it'll be super easy tonight because there's 3 of you. I gave them about 5 or 10 minutes to look at these first 2 questions, and you've already responded to these questions on Blackboard, so you can use whatever materials you need to discuss them. And I put you in a little breakout room. I'm not in that discussion, so it kind of like symbolizes the classroom, right, where we put people in a group and let you talk to each other, and then we come back and we report out. I'm still going to allow you to do that, even though there's 3 of you. I don't need to be in that part of the conversation. I do have the capability of coming into your breakout room that I'm going to put you in shortly. But if that's okay, I still want to follow the agenda sort of as closely as I can and give you time to talk about these first 2 questions. And then you'll come back in this larger space with me, and basically you'll debrief me. Yesterday we had like 2 groups, so we had a little more of each group's like going back and forth. But it was still helpful for me to give you this opportunity to talk about these 2 questions and then come back to this large area. In this group we're in now is sort of like the big room. This is being recorded. When you're in your breakout room, that's not being recorded. So you feel free to use your video if you want to turn them on when you go into the breakout room. You'll know you're in there. You'll also get a countdown for when you're gonna be kicked out of the breakout room and come back to this big area. So that countdown, consider that your opportunity to turn your cameras off if you want to, because when we come back into this collective space, I'll be recording again. Does that work for you all those instructions?
Yeah, we got it.
Yeah, that sounds
Right.
good.
And I wanted to have these questions up here long enough for you to look at them. So basically, I just wanted to, before I send you over to your breakout space, Rexroth and Glover and McCracken, those 2 readings you had, those readings were about, giving you some foundational background information about popular literature. So, and then Foster he doesn't speak directly about popular fiction. He or popular literature. He's doing something different. So that the first question really comes from all the reading that you read, but basically those foundational texts, the rationale, like, why study, or why should people read or even study popular literature? What is that in the readings that you have? What might you share with each other about that? And then the second one is, how might we define it, and according to who? So as you go to this breakout room, those are 2 questions I want you to focus on. And if Foster is not telling you directly about popular literature, what is it that Foster is doing for us in this class? So those are the questions, and I'm gonna go and figure out this breakout room. I'm going to pause my video while I do that, because no one needs to see me fumble through that part. Right, looks like you're back. Are you okay?
Yes.
So, did that work out? Were you able to talk to each other?
Yeah, we were. The 10 minutes kind of went by fast.
All right, I'm gauging this stuff, so you all need to let me know that. So I will do better.
I will say, we saw like when you were typing things to us, but it kind of showed up in a little blue box at the top and then disappeared. So we kind of had to try to keep in our head what you were saying. So maybe putting it in the chat or something beforehand would help. Just keep all the questions right there.
Oh, that's wonderful, because I didn't know. I'm like, I wonder if every time I type something, if it disappears. So now I know.
Yeah, it disappeared, but it's like the chat, the main chat thing at the bottom of this one, we could still see that question in the breakout room. So if we put them there, we'll still be able to reference them.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, I Didn't know. Now I know. Good. Hopefully you still had enough in your memory to talk about. So what I like to know is what kinds of things that you come up with, like what kind of rationale could you all share with me? I'm the only person here who doesn't know what you talked about. Those first two questions. What kinds of rationale did you give each other? And after talking, if you were able to cover both these questions, it's on you. Tell me something.
Yeah, so for the first question, it was like a rationale for studying popular literature.
Mhm.
We were able to say like it's probably being able to like get a different viewpoint, being able to look at what the author and the characters like cultural context was, and kind of getting kind of a reflection of what the greater real life culture was kind of like, and you know, just getting different viewpoints and things. Even though it isn't like a true story, there is still like true I guess like moral
Elements,
choices and characters
maybe
and things like that.
like elements. There's some truth in the story, even though it may not be a true story.
Yeah, exactly.
Um, Something you said that is important to hold on to, and it's that you use the word cultural. So understanding and culture has so to break it down, the most easiest way is just like values and beliefs, values, traditions, beliefs, practices of any group of people. And so I want you all to make sure you hold on to the idea of how cultural those values, beliefs, traditions, and practices play into the literature that we're reading, and it has so many layers, right? Because to bring your own set of cultural values, beliefs, practices to the reading, and often we may not get as much out of something because we're not paying attention to what we're bringing. We're just looking at the story. So hopefully that, just hold on to that is all I'm saying. Just don't dismiss what you're bringing and the so many layers of social norms of cultures or practices. All right, what about the definitions? Wasn't it so easy to define popular literature or what? It's like so.
Yeah, we kind of said it seemed like a giant like mosh podge of different ideas. That it's like, what are the best sellers? What does everybody tend to read? Like what tends to sell the most? Like what makes the most money? Depending on like who kind of defined it. And then sometimes like it's kind of a similar storyline, or the similar types of stories seem to be popular among similar or different audiences. And then we kind of said that who defines it. It's kind of cool. We think like all like the population decides it. It just happens to be like who, like what resonates with people and what the most readers tend to lean towards and end up reading.
Yeah,
But it's kind of all over the place. We didn't come up with one individual definition.
yeah, and there's some major features, right? So there's some major things that you find in popular culture. One, the story should be it should be accessible. And there's so many different groups because it depends on the demographics of the people who are reading it. It's generational. Oh my gosh, Twilight. I can't tell you how horrible an experience that was for me personally. but but to the young women that I knew at the time, it was the end all be all. And the only reason I cracked open a Twilight book was because of my daughters. So first of all, I'm sorry if I'm offending people and you love Twilight. I'm sorry, but I didn't love it. And I thought and thinking about popular culture, like literature, is it easy for those texts to become like movies? A lot of pop culture is turned into movies. And thinking about Frankenstein and Dracula, two historical stories, those are now those are considered classics. They're taught in classrooms. They're not as fun. But at one point, that's like, yeah, that's popular culture. And it was, and also we think about popular culture this way, educationally. So people with, say, a high school education read more popular literature than people with college education or higher. They might read more classics. The idea is that the accessibility of it, it's produced for mass populations. But that should not negate the complexities that happen in this literature. So snooty college graduates, like say me, the English instructor, like, well, no, I don't read popular literature. That's for the common people. That's, you know, it's easy. It's not, especially when you look at it, the two texts that you had start off with, there's a lot of stuff going on in these texts. And especially the horror at Red Hook, you gotta sort of understand 1924. If you were offended by anything that happened in his text, like I read his text, I'm like, wow. Some of the ways that he described people who who would be of like marginalized group, I'm like, yeah, you can't say that stuff today. But at one point, it was like, no, that's just how it goes. So there are layers to popular culture, and we usually do get them in literary format before we get them as like movies or something. So the question of who gets to define it is everyone. And I hope you understand why one of your assignments this semester is to define popular literature. So that is one of the assignments you have. And this is my commercial break. Please make sure you look at the actual syllabus and due dates, not just waiting for me to populate every week, because you have that. Because you need to look ahead to see when those major assignments are due. That definition, defining popular lit, you're going to be in a small group. People will know their small groups by the start of next week. But yeah, how would you define popular literature? And I'm looking forward to seeing how you and a couple of your classmates decide what that should look like, because everyone gets to do it. And hopefully that was helpful. Do you have anything else you want to add about that first part of the conversation? Because we're going to move on we're not going to talk about point 3, just because you only had that one presentation on horror and dark fantasy. So we won't leave these lessons behind. We'll just build on them. But I hope as we move on, the next conversation we have will be more about applying to the literature. Oh, did you do anything with Foster? Foster doesn't talk specifically about popular literature. So what's up with him? What is it useful for? Did you get to that?
Yeah, we talked about that he doesn't talk specifically about popular literature, but he does talk about like some common I don't even know if it's the right term, but I keep thinking like literary devices or like ways to like bring a common kind of collective symbolism or like legend into like writings that artists are doing now, and kind of talks about how how those symbols can give a text depth, or they can play off it and make something ironic. And yeah, I appreciate that kind of in the way that, like you were saying, that you'll be watching a movie and be able to spoil the movie because you know what's going on. Like if you know that something is just Hamlet reincarnated, you know, it kind of makes, you know, so we talked about that.
Good. So, I mean, he's our toolbox. He is like, these are some things every single chapter in there and that you've been assigned, you've been assigned a lot, not the whole book. So, but every single thing you read is something that you can take and apply as a perspective to get something out of the literature. That's why I like him. So that's what he's useful. The other two are really good for helping us get into defining and understanding things, but he's approach, like, it's a quest. It's all one story. Here's symbolism. What does weather mean? You know, so and so you'll have him to apply throughout the semester. He gives us the literary approaches. And since he's talking about literature, popular literature is a subcategory of literature. So he's talking about the big category, and then we have popular lit, and then within popular literature, we are looking at 3 other subgenres of a subgenre. It's kind of like Pandora's box. It just keeps getting divided into smaller pieces. So the next one I like for you all to, and again, you're gonna have about 9 minutes. I'm sorry, I talk too much. But I'm not sure where people are at. Hopefully you did finish these 2, but it's gonna look at, talk about Lovecraft and Lavelle. And then my question for you, and I'm not sure if you had a chance to look at the presentation on horror and dark fantasy, but I asked which one would you put in the horror category and which one would go into dark fantasy. But the other question is, why do people even look at this? Why do we want to? Given the nature of horror and fantasy is meant to address our fears, why do people read it? What good is it? So looking at that, and then also, if you read both of them, and we're gonna continue talking about them in the future, you know, what kind of conversation that you find happening between these 2 texts? So I think I asked you 3 things. First is, why do people read horror? And then which one of these would we call dark fantasy versus horror? And then what kinds of conversation did you see? And I'm gonna try to copy and paste this into the actual chat box as I send you over to talk a little bit more. We'll come back and we're almost done. Okay, welcome back. Well, one of you, is everyone? Okay, there you are. Everyone's back. Okay, so we have about 4 minutes. I think that's enough time for to hear your report out and any questions you may have. So let me know what you know. What did you share? See how trusting I am. I know you had great conversation.
We found that presentation you were talking about, and that helped a lot. But like before, I don't think any of us had really looked at that, and we said fear or horror is kind of like fear invoking and thrilling, but then that PowerPoint gave a lot more clear examples.
Okay. All right. So and I think I have that. But even without that, why did you all come up with like why, or even this the conversation between these 2? I think that's where Savannah actually started today, like these 2 stories. Did you see any conversations between these 2 perspectives, or what did you all talk about? I'm gonna bring up, no, that's not what I want. So I'm gonna bring up the so it's for this week, so I hadn't anticipated everyone would have looked at this, but I'm also going to bring up the VoiceThread option because, you know, I'm pushing that as a pilot. So if you click on the VoiceThread, what this allows you to do is you can actually look at the presentation, and I'm logged in here. I didn't mean to do that. But you can look at this and then just record or even type right into this document like questions you may have. So the presentation, we start with H.P. Lovecraft. Like, he gets a lot of love and hate in general. So if you're interested in like a controversial figure, he's your go-to guy. But he's good at his craft, but he also had a lot of prejudice against people in general. So he's a controversial figure. But one of the things he tells us is that, the whole point of horror is to is to mess around with this idea of fear. And one of the things is that looking at our fears through this fictional phase may be kind of cathartic, maybe a way that we could release anxiety and fear about things like death and, the scary things that religion may tell us, so that we can function better. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like an outlet for those emotions that otherwise you wouldn't be able to find a good outlet for.
Yeah. And it lets us wrestle with a lot of psychological and uncertainty about life. And then this screen here is, I just like the history of words, and I provided this because the what we get from horror fiction is on 3 different levels. It's an emotional level, so it's a feeling, and it's a mental thing. It messes with our minds, and it's also a physical reaction. So when someone jumps out and you scream, it's actual physical reaction. So it messes with us on all these levels, and usually not just one. It kind of combines them all. So even within this genre, there are subgenres. Like there could be just like psychological horror, just messes with your mind. And then there's a creepy crawly. I really regret ever having seen part of The Human Centipede. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, do not look it up. It is what it sounds like. It's one of the most horrible movies I've ever seen. I'm like, so yeah, just the creepy crawlies of it all. But I wanted to get to the difference between horror and dark fiction. And the main difference is, even though these terms are used interchangeably, one of the main differences is that horror usually is going to involve some sort of supernatural, and you won't get a sense of any background about that supernatural. It's about the people, how people interact with this unknown thing. But dark fantasy, that often gives you the perspective of that monster or the supernatural thing. So given that, which category would you put these into?
So we put Lovecraft into horror because it was just kind of, for me, it was this guy going into this place, and did that really happen or didn't it really happen? And just kind of the intent seemed to be to unnerve the audience. Whereas for Ballad of Black Tom, it seemed like it was more like an exercise in like a revenge sequence, and like being able to you got to see the perspective of Tom kind of, and see his motivations for things. So even though he ended up being not like the big baddie, because that would have been the kind of Cthulhu type thing in the background, but because he was the one that ended up being kind of the source of the horror in kind of the climactic part of the book, and you got to kind of see his motivations afterwards, that would be more of like a dark fantasy kind of a tale instead.
Yeah, I mean, we get the perspective of, well, he was a regular guy, but we see him change over time, and he becomes this in between thing. Is he what's like a sorcerer or something? So we do get that other perspective. It's not just on the surface. And we also do get a lot, I mean, other than the fact that both these titles help us, the horror at Red Hook tells us it's a horror story. But even the Ballad of Black Tom, I think I said this yesterday, thinking about what a ballad is, even the format of a ballad, what a ballad is meant to do, that also gives us some idea about this sort of more deeper, transformative thing that's happening in this story. And I'm gonna leave us at this because I took you 3 minutes over and I deeply apologize. But if you could, before you log off, if you could in the chat area, just post a parting thought, a reflection. And then it's kind of like your exit ticket that you were here. I asked you to do the same thing when you come, like post something if you have a pressing question. And when you leave, a recap, a final thought, or anything before you just log off. But I do have you over, and I suppose I'm sorry. I'm sorry. But I hope this was helpful. And as we move on, hopefully it'll make more sense that how these sessions will run. And we're gonna do more of this, talking about applying the perspectives to the literature. So thank you for joining. And if you have questions, I'm gonna stop the recording now.